All right, how you doing, everybody? I'm Greg. I'm with the QC Rock Academy, and we have a good friend of ours, Jeff Ocheltree, is here to chat with us today and talk about his storied career and all kinds of cool things that he's done over. What are we at? 50-ish years that
About 50, yeah.
you've been doing this, and you're only like 53. So
53. So I started when I was 3 years old, and it was rough at first, but
yeah,
I got through it.
well, you learned how to walk.
Yeah, I had to learn how to walk and carry the drums, and that was a rough one. Yeah.
So he is known in the drum community as kind of like the drum tech to the stars, the first ever drum tech.
They call me the grandfather of
the grandfather
the godfather or godfather.
Let's call it Godfather.
Yeah. You're the godfather of drum techs.
So you came here to our school a couple weeks ago and talked to a bunch of students, and I was like, we need more of this guy's story to put out there and let everybody hear some of the amazing things that you've done in your career. And I've done a bunch of research on you.
Okay.
And
but there wasn't much out there.
I didn't find a ton. I saw videos of your Trust Your Ears stuff that you did years ago.
Right.
And then a little blurb that happened at NAMM, and then a few like message board things were talking about your snares and your all that. But I was like, this guy has so many stories that need to be told, I feel.
Yeah. A book type thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll write a book on this in the next. We'll do that over the next 2 years.
Get that edited in a year at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's start kind of at the beginning, because through the late 60s into the early 70s, most guys didn't have techs.
No.
There was like maybe some guys that would help set up the stage.
Yeah, they have a couple roadies, and they would do everything. They set up the amps, set up the drums. They were called setup guys. There was no personal skills needed for a particular instrument, except for guitars.
Okay.
Now, if you couldn't tune a guitar, then you couldn't be a guitar roadie.
Okay.
But most of the guitar players and drummers were doing everything on their own.
Because I heard Hendrix wasn't able to really tune his own guitar.
I never heard that one.
McCartney told a story about that.
I find that a little hard to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's off subject.
I mean, a left-hander talking about another left-hander playing upside down, whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
I find that a little hard to believe that Hendrix couldn't tune his guitar. But let's get McCartney on the phone.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know who tuned it for him then.
I heard it was at a show that it was some of the Beatles were there, Clapton was there, just watching Jimmy play.
Okay.
And he asked from the crowd, he's like, I can't tune my guitar. Can somebody come up and help me?
Well, it sounds like he was on acid that day or something.
It very well could have been.
I don't know anything about that. Wow, I've never heard that.
So, but anyway,
yeah.
Back to you,
yes.
Getting into the business and
right.
really starting the business.
Right.
How did that all come about?
Well, I kind of talked about it when I was here doing the clinic with Terry, which, by the way, thank you for having us here.
Absolutely.
This is a really great place. I mean, you should be very proud of yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah. What happened was I was in a band with a couple of cool guys in Santa Cruz, California, and I think we were called Duck Butter or something. I can't remember now.
Duck Butter.
Yeah, I think it was that. And we did a lot of shows in like the Fillmore and places like that. And I had some really nice Rogers drums, some really good Zildjian cymbals. I had some really nice gear. And my brother and I went out to dinner one night, and we were going back to the place where the bands rehearsed. Well, not bands, but a band of our friends. They let us put our gear in there. And so I had my drums all set up, and I'd been practicing, and we had a rehearsal coming up with Howard Dumble, the amplifier maker.
Okay.
He was in my best buddy and one of my best buddies, and the damn building was on fire. And I mean, there were fire trucks all around it. And I mean, it was on fire. And it was by a sailboat shop that used a lot of resin. So they were really worried. And I could look through the doorway where one of the guy holding the hose, and I said, can you let me run through there and get my drums? And he said, why would I do that? I said, because that part of the place isn't on fire yet. If I could just run right back there and grab those. He said, you probably set the fire. This is a fireman. And my brother and I went ballistic on this guy. He would not let us. Other firemen came and they're putting the fire out, which is they better get it out pretty soon. And it totally discouraged me from a lot of different things at the moment, because I really thought I could run there and grab the bass drum with the toms on it and come back and get the floor toms. And I mean, really beautiful Rogers kit, 24-inch bass drum.
And it went up in flames?
It charred. The next day, Dumble found it in the ruins and put it out in front of the property and just let it sit there. He kept it. I didn't know he had done this. Years later, he was renting Jackson Brown's house, and he had it in a storage shed. Come here, I want to show you something. And he shows my brother and I this charred Rogers kit. Unbelievable. Anyway, that night, I was extremely depressed. And the band Snail, which they've been here before, they're a really good band in Santa Cruz. At the time, they were one of the best bands I'd ever heard. And they said, why don't you go with us? We're doing a short tour. Help Ron Fillmore with his drums and try to get your mind off this.
Yeah.
And they had stuff in there too, but most of their gear was in the truck ready to go.
Okay.
And they had some nice guitars, nice Marshalls, SVTs, they had all that stuff. Beautiful Ludwig, double Ludwig kit. So they lucked out. They had taken everything out of there, and put it in the truck ready to go. So I went with them. As much as I didn't really want to go anywhere, I was really stumped. Like, where am I going to get the money to buy more drums right now?
Yeah.
Where can I get drums to do a gig?
Yeah.
So that was sort of my way to figure it out, but get involved in some work. And I literally, what was like 2 days later, said, you know what? This is what I want to do. I want to get guys drums all ready for them so they can just sit down and play. So I need to ask them all kinds of questions, even though I've known them for a long time. I'm going to ask Ron Fillmore all these questions, and I'm going to talk to him about, even though I think I know how he's tuning, I'm going to get to the bottom of this, and I'm going to be their roadie on this tour. They had one guy, and he was a good guy. But he didn't know anything about drums. He knew how to set all the amps and tune guitars and help those guys. But like I say, everybody back then, especially guitar players, they tuned their own guitars, even though they had a guy that would help them. This not trusting of the non-player tuning. Yeah. But drummers didn't have anybody. I never saw anybody except a few people that could afford somebody to just set them up, get them exactly how they want them. But tuning or any of that, one guy that I think I told this story when I was here is the guy from Rare Earth. I love that band. The drummer sang all the songs.
Okay.
He played really good drums. And he came up to me at the Monterey Fairgrounds and he said, hey, I've been watching you working on this guy's kit. You think you could help me change my snare drum head? I said, for sure, yeah. He says, yeah, because it's never been changed. It was glued on.
Oh my goodness.
Coke or whatever, drinking Coca-Cola or whatever, sodas, whatever, beer, it's gotten down inside there. And this head was going to go, and why he hadn't changed. And I had to use a hammer to hammer it off the shell.
Chisel it off.
So stuck on there and clean it. That's the other thing. There was hardly any time for these guys to do maintenance because they're traveling, touring, So that's how I did it. I just got immersed in helping just guys at random while I was working with this band Snail. Okay. And one day, a friend of ours named Arthur Rosado, he had been working for Bill Graham for a long time.
Oh, the promoter guy.
What's that?
The promoter?
Yeah,
okay.
Who's major guy in the music business. He helped change everything. Get different types of genres to play together in a venue and all that. And open the eyes of a lot of people, about music. Music they probably wouldn't have heard if he hadn't promoted it the way he did. So Arthur came up to me one day in Santa Cruz and said, listen, the Ma Vishnu Orchestra is going to be playing downtown at the Del Mar Theater, and I want to set up a meeting so you and your brother can meet them. And they need some guys like you. And I said, the Ma Vishnu Orchestra? Yeah. He says, you got, I know you have one of their albums because you showed me one day. And I said, oh, yeah, okay. So I'll just never forget those guys. We went down to the Del Mar Theater. We waited for them, and they all show up in a bunch of rent-a-cars in a great big truck, and the Roadies were driving the truck. And the Roadies had nice clothes on. They're from New York. Anthony Barone, who was our road manager with Billy Cobham, and these other guys, they weren't the typical roadie. They had nice clothes on. Okay. So if they caught their sleeve in something and ripped their shirt, well, talking about $60 back then for the shirt. The clothes they wore were really nice, and I just I couldn't figure out why those guys were. Well, they were friends of John McLaughlin and the band.
Makes sense.
So that's a lot of guys got gigs like that because they were friends. They weren't really focused on becoming really good at that. There's just they're helping the band. So I just remember meeting them, and they were all so cool and so really respectful and nice. And they asked them, all of them asked different questions, like, "What do you guys do? You know, who you been working with?" And all that. And then John McLaughlin looked at me and says, "Would you like to work with us?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, let's go do the sound check, and we'll talk about this after sound check." And the sound check blew my mind.
Oh, yeah.
It just blew my mind. Billy's playing just, I'd never seen anything like it before. So I said, I got to work with these
guys. You got that big old kit.
Yeah. Lots of drums, but that's what was so cool about it is you're not just learning his configuration setup, you're learning what does he like about the different size drums, and what is he, they were clear fives. They were made in Long Island. They were all clear acrylic, and they had clear ambassadors, and it was just really a special sound check because we went downstairs to eat afterwards, and I noticed the lines of people. It's like the place was sold out and then some. So I realized, well, they have a really heavy duty following.
Yeah.
And so we went downstairs, and they said, "What do you think?" And my brother said, "Man, I'll work for you in a New York second." And they said, "Well, that's where you'll have to move to." And I said to him, "I've been wanting to get out of here anyway. There's just too many lazy people here." Okay. And McLaughlin says, "Oh, you mean you don't smoke pot and sit around and talk about things?" I said, "No, I don't." I says, "I'll go tomorrow if I have to." Wow. Well, we got a couple more weeks on the tour, and we'll give you all the information. And but if you want to do this, we'll hire you. And I said, I would love to do it. So that's what happened. 3 weeks later, I was in New York.
Oh, wow.
I couldn't wait. And then a few months later, they broke up. Yeah.
But you stuck with Billy.
Oh, yeah. So when they broke up, then there was going to be some time for each one of them to figure out what they were going to do. And so I was called by this guy, Anthony. "Listen, Billy wants you and your brother to work with him." And my brother said, "Wow, I got a call from a guy who said John McLaughlin wanted me to work with them." And so we were separated, but in a way, I'm kind of glad it happened that way. And then when we started rehearsals with Billy, it wasn't for at least a month or so. I remember Billy saying, "Where's your brother?" I said, "Oh, he's with McLaughlin." He said, "Really?" And I didn't know there was all kinds of undercurrents or, you know, why did they break up? Well, you know, there's all kinds of pretty heavy duty reasons. But I just remember being so excited the first day, you know, setting up Billy's drums, and I just, it was like nothing I'd ever encountered before. Everything was brand new in the city that I always wanted to move to and live in for a while. Yeah. And be, you know, live like a sponge and soak up everything. And so it was a great experience to start off that way. And we had 2 months of rehearsing, amazing band, and then we played a gig at Carnegie Hall, and I told you about that here, where the first row is Carmine, Carl Palmer, Buddy Rich, and he shared the same building where we rehearsed, called Bill's Music Rentals. Okay. And it was on 53rd and 7th or something. And I remember Buddy, we had an amazing show at Carnegie Hall. Here I am at Carnegie Hall. I see those guys down there. This is my first gig with him as a solo artist. And I just remember the next day setting the gear all back up, lots of gear. The big band, lots of stuff to set up. But I was just drums. That's all I did. I was not asked to help with anybody else, and I'm glad because I said, no, I'm just doing. This is my gig right here.
Yeah.
That's and a lot of people didn't take the drummers stuff as serious as all the other things, and so I had to kind of fight some prejudice. He spends way too much time, and he's but that's okay because I'm working for the boss, and he wanted a guy like that. He wanted somebody that would take good care of his gear. So I remember Buddy Rich just shoving the door open to the room, and he looks at Billy, and Billy says, "Hey, buddy," and he says, "Hey, Billy, nice rehearsal last night at Carnegie Hall." Man. Billy just looked at him, and he said, "Thanks, buddy. You had to get your smart-ass remarks in."
So. That's great. So
it was.
So how long did you stick with that gig with Billy?
Well, I stayed with him for, let's see, the end of 73, 74, 75. Yeah, I think I was at the end of 75.
Because we talked earlier, Bryce, our guitar teacher,
right.
had shot me this video the other night
right.
of Billy playing in Norway in 74.
Right.
And
Kongsberg, Norway, I think it was.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Where the sun stays up all day.
And he's
long.
like, "Is that your buddy Jeff in the back?" And he like screenshot, and you were wearing like this green shirt.
Yeah,
and
it said Billy Cobham on it.
Was it?
Yeah.
And he had the big old stash. I was like, I think it's him.
Yeah.
Well, have to ask when he gets here.
Yeah, it's a good video. I think I'm running around sometimes trying to do something, and that was my second European tour with him, and there was always something cool to learn or to observe. My whole thing was my dream was to move to New York. This is way before the Mahavishnu, before any of this. My dream was to move from Santa Cruz to New York and soak up all the kind of busy culture, the busyness. I wanted to be involved in that energy. And the other thing was to tour, especially to Europe, where I would be learning about those countries and maybe some of the language. So Billy toured all the time to all these places, everywhere. And that was like, it was
That's
really
a dream gig.
It's a dream gig. Yeah. And I was on retainer.
Okay.
I remember once getting called and being asked, what would you consider to be a good retainer? Now, what?
What's a retainer?
What's that mean? And I was blown away. I was so flattered that Billy wanted to make sure I was accessible all the time and that I was being paid to be loyal, so to speak. I didn't need to be paid, but that really helped because if you're not working for 2 or 3 weeks, what do you do?
Yeah.
You can't go off with anybody else, and I wouldn't want to. I mean, I was so dedicated to him. To me, it was a dream gig. It was, I couldn't have asked for such a great situation. He taught me so much without words, just by example. When I'd watch him warm up before sound check, and I'd watch him do some things with some of the drums and practice something or coming up with an idea. And I'd listen to the tones of the bottom heads and all that. One day he turned to me and he said, "Yeah, this drum here, you didn't do anything wrong. It's just that it definitely needs to be pitched up a bit." And I said, "Thank you for telling me." Instead of saying, "Why are you not catching all this?"
Because I guess really back then, because there was nobody to teach you how to
there were no
tune.
mentors, right?
So everything you did was trial and error.
Trial and error, which is okay.
Yeah.
Because especially with a guy like him, he didn't mind you testing the waters and seeing what find out how your ears work in relationship to the pitches of his drums. And I mean, he was still is. He's a smoking player. There's no one ever like him.
Yeah.
And we would talk about Bonham and all that, but Billy Cobham, he's really opened the doors to a lot of different things in drumming. And he was so powerful, yet he had such amazing technique. And he could play real soft and still get, some wonderful drumming in that could be heard by, of course they had microphones, but that was a great experience.
That's
so I stopped at the end of 75 or beginning of 76. Didn't want to, but he was going to take some time off, and so we were all kind of just went on our way, and it was a sort of sad because it was like we'd all become like a family, and we toured a lot. We went around the world all the time. I mean, in America, we played every college, So yeah, it was a wonderful experience. It was interesting, the prejudice though with the other roadies. They didn't understand why I had as much leash that I had. I could do what I wanted to do because I was in charge. When we got to a venue, I picked out where the drums were going to go before anything.
Yeah, it wasn't put the drummer in the back.
You better believe it. And that's what they said. Doesn't matter what you're doing. We need to set up the guitars and all. No, you don't.
It's his name on the marquee.
That's right.
He goes where he wants.
That's right. It's pretty interesting how those times, how the attitudes. There was a lot of different attitudes. Yeah. Not all negative, but just I guess it was wonderful for me because I was going to show them I'm bringing the level up of how this is dealt with. Whether I'm good at it or not, I'm going to bring some awareness here. Don't look at the guy, this amazing drummer, and think that he carried his own mics. We had Neumanns, we had all these beautiful microphones. He said, I'll be damned if I'm going to be subject to limited mic selection. And they had a good sound company with us. We had this guy named Dickie Dawson out of Boston, Scottish guy. He had a great sound system, and we used him a lot. But Billy wanted to have certain mics. Well, those are used in the studio, and they're going to be used on live.
Yeah,
they're not made just for a studio. It's a microphone.
Yeah, I try to picture like that era, and as many drums as he used.
Yeah.
Like, how many toms were on that?
Well, he had 4 rack toms, and let's see, he had 12, 13, 10 by 14, and then another 13. And then he had 14, 16, 18. I think we had a 20 too, floor toms. And then eventually we made the gong drums. You had 2 of those. Okay. And then eventually we met this guy named Roger North from Portland, Oregon, who made the ship bellows looking drums.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Out of white, like resin or fiberglass. And we had 2 of those, a 12 and I think it was a 12 and a 13. They were out front. So there was quite a few drums. Yeah. And we had with us.
And what sound company, if you were going to some random college, is going to have that many mics?
They're not going to have that many
properly.
Well, we can mic the snare. We can mic.
Yeah. A couple overheads maybe.
We've got 2 bass drums and they're going to be mic'd. No hole. That's what I love. No hole. Mic the bass drums from the front. Yeah. I never heard anybody say, well, you gotta have to cut a hole in that. I mean, he wouldn't have said it to me. Yeah. But it's interesting because he played so well, those double bass drums, that you could hear him really well. Yeah. Even though there were some mics on him, but you could hear him really well because of the way he played them.
All right. So what are the differences for you when tuning for studio versus live?
Well, there's a premise no matter where you are, and that is to get a live sound, a tone, get good tone drums, live sound always. Whereas in the old days, the studio was deaden everything.
Okay.
Well, what about all the reflective surfaces that you can have?
Yeah.
Studios today, man, some of the ones that I work in, they're amazing drum tracking studios. Just amazing. Microphones way up in the ceiling, and you're using the hardwood floor, you're using,
Yeah.
So real quickly, what I'm trying to get with any drum, anywhere, any environment, is just make it sound good. And if you can't capture that with those microphones and that Neve console, good luck, because I'm doing the best I can do.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky, so to speak. There's some luck involved. Feel the room out a little bit, but most just concentrate. Get them to sound good. And you know where you're going, so you have some, even if you've never been there before, you know where you're going, you know what to expect. If it's a real live room, they have the gobles that they can move in and out. but you want to pretend those aren't there. You want the drums to sound good in a big room, which is usually where they track drums. Unless you're in Nashville, and they'll put you in the closet. but I just have a premise that no matter where we are, will these drums sound good and will they project? And that's and if you have to make some changes, it's not dramatic. It's not horrible changes. The things you have to deal with. It's just if you've been doing this a long time, get them ready for the session before you get there. Now they're set up. Now you have to deal with a new place that they're set up in.
Okay.
So work with it real quick. Don't spend a lot of time.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a bunch of time. If your ears are working and you sort of have that, you've been around studios long enough to know, wow, they chose this area to put the drums because this is the best part of the studio in the large room. Yeah. This last session I did, we had the drums set up in the large room in Guilford, Vermont, amazing studio. But they also had an ISO booth the other side of the kit because it's a double kit.
Okay.
They put the other drums in the ISO booth. They wanted to get two different sounds.
Interesting.
And we only did 4 songs. But they wanted a different sound. So the one side of the kit was we had the 22-inch bass drum, no hole. We had a 10 by 14. We had a 14 by 14. A 16 and an 18. Then we go into the other room, the other bass drum. It's tuned a little differently. It has a little bit of newspaper inside of it with the felt. Okay. But it's still big and has a note, has a tone. Yep. That's what we're looking for all the time, tone. Yeah. That's Cindy's favorite word. I don't really care about all that stuff, but I want tone, old school tone. So the other room, the ISO booth, pretty small, but it had a real tall ceiling in it with all the stuff hanging down. And we had the other bass drum, a 13-inch, another 14 by 14, and an 18-inch bass drum. I mean, so all the way from 13 to 18 with a little 14 in between. And we used different snare drums. We used Steve Smith's Phantom steel drum that I made. Okay. So all I'm saying is that you're even though you're in a smaller room, the ISO booth, you don't tune the drums differently. As a matter of fact, I actually pitched them up a little bit more so they were louder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Just to see if it would work.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, well, I met John Bonham and his roadie at the time, for a long time actually, named Mick Hinton. That was his name. Okay. He had worked with Humble Pie, who's a typical roadie in England. He wasn't a drum guy, but that's what he became. He worked with Shirley, the drummer for Humble Pie, for a little bit. And then he got the job with Zeppelin. And so he learned to set up, 4 drums that he had? 26, 10 by 14, 16, 18. That's all. And a snare drum. That's real easy. You really can't screw that up.
Yeah.
And then the cymbal stands on the hi-hat. So he had learned to do that. So when I met John Bonham, it was at this club on Sunset. And it was next to another place where a lot of people played. Now, I don't know why, I can't remember the name now. But I met Mick Hinton, and then he introduced me to John Bonham. And we had some festivities, a few drinks, and some carrying on a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I liked him. He was. I mean, I didn't have a lot of expectations like a lot of friends of mine. Zeppelin, man, I didn't really, I liked them. Yeah. I mean, they were great, but I didn't have expectations about him. I was working with Billy Cobham. But that's
you had your gig.
And that's what I said to him. I work with Billy Cobham. He said, "Oh, he's a great drummer." And I was glad he said that because I had this feeling like he's English. He's going to be opinionated about Zeppelin, which is good. He should be. Yeah. He has a right to be. Very proud of that band. He made them sound the way they sound, I think. A lot of it had to do with him. But so we had a lot of fun at this club. What was that? I can't believe I don't remember the name of it. Everybody would go there. All the roadies, all the bands would go there, and everybody would, meet each other and hang out and drink and eat good food. They had good food there. And it was next to the Roxy, which was a really cool club that people play there. So he invited me one time to come. I told him about my custom snare drums. And they were custom knit. I took Gretsch shells
Okay.
and redid them. And so those were custom.
Okay.
So I said to him, I have a 7-inch Gretsch shell. You love Gretsch. He didn't ever play him.
Yeah.
Jim Capaldi. I went with Jim Capaldi once to his house with a little Gretsch kit. And he said, these are cute. And he sat down and played them, sound just like a big kit. That's how good he was. He could make. But anyway, so where am I with this? I'm losing my memory.
You guys were partying together.
Yeah, we're partying together, and then he invites me when I told him about the snare drum to come to the Bel Air. I think that was a hotel, really nice hotel. He asked me to come there in the morning. I said, well, Mick said really early. How early? I'm thinking 11 o'clock. He said, no, you can come around 8:30, 9 o'clock. Really? Okay, so I drove all the way down from where I lived and went to the door, knocked on it, and he opened it up. He's in his bathrobe. It's funny as hell. John Bonham in his bathrobe. I'm going to go and hang out with him. Bring the snare drum in, and I show it to him, and then Mick comes from he has adjoining rooms. And I'm going to censor some of the stuff, so I'm not going to get into the other. So then he says, well, I'd love to see the drum. So I showed it to him. I had cable snares on it. It was a 7. I remember I painted it light yellow, and I did something else to it. It had die-cast hoops on it, and that really interested him because he'd never played a snare drum with die-cast hoops.
Okay,
always played triple flange, And he's tapping it and looking at it and all that. He said, "This is really cool, but I would probably never use it, even if it was given to you." And he said, "Oh, I wouldn't take it for free. I would pay you." I said, "Okay, give me $1,000." What? $1,000? I said, "I'm just kidding, but I just wanted to show it to you. I'm not interested. I'm not a drum salesman. I'm here as an artist type person, makes these drums, and I'm going to go somewhere with it someday. But right now, I'm just using Gretsch shells, and I take floor toms and cut them in half, and I don't make just deep ones, but that's what I'm interested in doing right now." So it was pretty cool to get his critiquing on it.
Yeah.
He was very respectful, very respectful. I was I could tell it wasn't something he might want because it wasn't metal, it was wood.
Yeah.
And he was really into superphonic snare drums, and so. But for me, that was fun because I got to hang with somebody and talk about drums. He didn't ever get to do that. He didn't sit around like people do today.
Yeah.
Talk about drums.
Yeah.
He was actually. I felt kind of sorry for him because unless he was with another great drummer or a bunch of people that are into drums, they're not going to come interview him during a Zeppelin show and ask him about drums.
Right.
They just didn't do that. I don't think while Bonham was alive, I think maybe he was becoming more. People were becoming more aware of what he was giving to that band and his playing. But I don't think. I mean, I've seen more stuff on Bonham now than I ever have. I don't get it. Yeah. Where were you guys in '70? So that was a great day. And so then, months later, almost a year later, we're in this place in England playing this show, and it was called Something Pond. It was an outdoor gig at a pond in front of the stage, and he was there to visit, and because Carmine was there with some band, and he had a keg of beer he was carrying around.
I got a good Carmine story for you later.
Okay, good. I love Carmine. One time I saw him behind the RKO. He was just standing in the alley.
Oh, downtown here?
In the winter, yeah. And I said, "Are you cold?" He goes, "I'm from New York. What do you think this is?" Okay, but I've known him a long time, since he was in Vanilla Fudge.
Okay. That's
how long I've known him. So I can't wait to hear your story. Anyway, so he comes up to the stage. I saw him down in the tent where people were eating and all that. I said, "Listen, could you come up and check out Billy's drums?" He said, "Okay." So he comes up there, and I remember him standing there, and he's looking at all these drums. He said, "Well, why does he have all those?" I said, "Because he plays them all." And he kind of took that like a smart-ass answer, and I said, he uses all these. Have you ever seen him? And, well, I think so, maybe. No, probably not. This will be my first time. Oh, you're going to stay? He said, yeah, because I heard he was going to drive back home, and he was getting pretty plastered. Everybody was. So I was glad he said he was going to stay. And he started asking me questions, and I thought it was cool because he asked me really good questions. Why does he have the 4 toms like that? Well, there's 4 of them. And okay, I get the cymbals. Why doesn't he have any angle on the cymbals? Well, do you have any angle on your crashes? No, that's right, I don't. Well, what about the ride? Well, he's got that china over here that's like this way. He's hitting it flat.
Yeah.
Okay, that's his sound. That's what he does. And so he asked me a lot of cool questions like that about the cymbals and about the setup. And then he said, because it was so natural, he said, well, you use ambassador clears on top and bottom? Yes. Okay. Well, what about the bass drum? Well, those are ambassador clear too, with felt. And he says, oh, yeah, felt. Got to have felt, you know. And he was just kind of looking at him and all that. And he said, okay, see ya. Shook hands, and that was it. Weeks, months later, maybe a year, I see him in LA again. And that's when we sat down and he said, listen, I have a question for you. I was watching you up there after I said goodbye to you, and I noticed you were doing a little tuning. He let you do that? I said, well, yeah. Well, why? Because I know how to.
Yeah.
Well, where did you learn that? I said, well, I was a player. Here's what happened to my drums, and then I made it my life's goal at that time to learn how to develop skills with all this.
Yeah.
So I could get this job, if not with him, with somebody else. He said, that's really cool. He says, I tune too, and I have a really good ear for it. I know I do. I listen to big band albums. I listen to all that kind of stuff because that's where the drums are the most natural.
Yeah.
And then I got it. He wants to swing, he wants to play loud, but it's got tone and it's got it makes sense what he's doing. It's because of his influences. His influences are jazz drummers and big band drummers. Yeah. So I learned something about him by him trying to figure out why he thought it was odd that I said, well, Billy, trust me. I don't think he would let me do this if he thought I was going to screw him up, sabotage him.
Yeah.
And that he liked. So he said to me, well, maybe you could teach my guy. And I said, you mean Mick Hinton? And he said, yeah, maybe you could teach him how to do that. And I said, well, I don't know how that would work. I wanted to say because he takes reds all the time. He's screwed up all the time. This is a guy that Jason Bonham, we had him at our house all the time. We had picnics at our house. He was always there. He was our friend, you know. You're a little kid. Shut up. Yeah. So, sorry. You know. So what I'm getting at is that I guess what was lucky for me is that I didn't come off arrogant, because I'm not arrogant about that. I felt so lucky to be able to work with Billy Cobham and be asked questions. That's why I met Steve Smith and Vinny. They were going to Berkeley, and they would ask me so many questions. They'd come down there early. They'd skip class, whatever, and they'd come down there. What are you doing that for?
Yeah.
I'm trying to do, you know, and they were astute enough to know most of what I was doing.
Yeah.
But they asked such cool questions, and I felt so proud, you know, I'm being asked questions, you know.
Yeah.
That was kind of neat.